This is a short presentation on Piaget for INTC 5110. Pictures here are of Piaget both as a young man and then later on through his life. He's probably most famous towards the end of his life. But the basics of his approach were that he created what's called a genetic epistemology. The idea is that knowledge is dependent on age. So that there are different stages and different ages when you are more capable of learning certain kinds of things. He also believed that knowledge is invented by the child, which is the reason why he's often called a constructivist. That experience changes knowledge, so that as you experience more things, you gain knowledge. And that children develop schemas, patterns for what they experience in the world, so that when they see a new object or they have a new experience, they then have to either redevelop or tweak their schemas to handle the new experiences. Piaget believed that there were several types of knowledge. One was physical, which is the knowledge of objects. And your knowledge of objects comes from direct perception, action on the object. So, for example, you learn size, color, taste, texture by actually touching things or seeing things that exist in the real world, so that you have these concrete experiences. The next level of knowledge is logical mathematical, where you introduce abstract concepts. These things are invented based upon your experiences and learn from the actions that you take on physical objects. Things like numbers and the idea of mass and the idea of time, these are abstract concepts. These are things that don't exist in the real world, but we give them names. And so that type of knowledge comes from that experience, and then trying to define the abstract parts of that experience. And then last is the social arbitrary knowledge. These are created by our interactions with other people, and they tend to be culturally specific. In other words, the context in which we learn them and the culture in which we learn them. Things like language and morals and symbols all depend upon where you are in the world and what culture you happen to be in. So, for instance, road signs in Australia have very different meanings, or actually the same meanings as road signs here, but the symbols that they represent and things like that are all dependent upon the context in which they are. He also believed in stages of development. This is probably his biggest contribution. Stages represent qualitative changes in cognition, or in other words, differences in the kinds of things that you can think about. All children pass through these stages in order, no matter what their culture. This is a belief of Piaget's that actually gained some criticism later. But the idea is that no matter where you are, these are stages that you pass through, and each stage then incorporates the previous stage. So in other words, you don't change everything that you do. You just incorporate what was done in a previous stage into your new stages. All actions and schemes therefore work to form an integrated understanding of the world. So as you get older, you try to integrate all your experiences together into a coherent understanding. And these are the basic stages that Piaget believed existed. First was stage 1, which is birth to 2 years, and that was the sensory motor period. That's when you adapt your reflexes, you become goal-directed, and you develop what's called object permanence. In other words, you name something, you think something is called this, and it takes on that a permanent idea in your mind. It's fixed. So this is, obviously toddlers, babies to toddlers, and I think pretty much everybody can agree that this is a very common developmental stage. Very common developmental process. Stage 2 then is 2 to 7 years, so this would be your elementary years. And they're called pre-operational. And during this phase, you acquire your languages. So in other words, you can learn a language. You learn what things mean. You also develop your imagination, so you start to be able to think outside of the concrete. You tend to be egocentric, which means you really only think about what's in your realm of experience. You really can't get out from beyond that. And you can do very one-dimensional types of problem solving, very simple things. such as what part of the puzzle fits where, things like that. Stage 3 then is the concrete operational period, and that's 7 to 11 years, and that's concrete reasoning. So then you're able to actually make concrete assumptions about things. You can invent operations for novel problems, so you can actually think outside of the simple problem solving that you did before. And you also tend to start to do hierarchical classifications. You can say that there are multiple things that fit into a certain category in your brain. Stage 4 then is the formal operational period, and that's age 11 through adulthood. You can abstract. You can do reasoning in the abstract. You can make up a hypothesis or a conjecture, and you can also do systematic types of problem solving. So these were the stages, stage 1 being sensory motor, stage 2 being pre-operational, stage 3 concrete operational, and stage 4 is formal operational. And this is the well-known Piaget stages of development. Piaget also believed that there were several parts of the developmental process, the way that you would go through moving from one stage to the other. One is called assimilation, which means that when we perceive new situations in terms of previously formed schemes, so that when we encounter a new situation, we will then try to assimilate it to schemes that we've already formed. So if I already have an idea of what, let's say, driving a car is, then when I'm faced with a new car, a different kind of car, I think I used this example in the information processing as well, then what we try to do is we try to then match this to what we already know. So if I've learned to drive a car, say stick shift, then I got into a automatic car, I'm going to immediately call up the scheme for driving a car, and I'm going to try to mimic that with the new one. And then that's going to work to a certain degree or not. But what's going to happen is I'm then going to accommodate, which is the next part of the developmental process. I'm going to modify my scheme to deal with my new experiences. So I'm going to say, okay, this is a different kind of car. So when I'm faced with this kind of car, I have to drive a little differently. Equilibration is the transition from one stage to the next by adopting more sophisticated cognitive processes. And that's the point at which you actually do the transition. So let's say I can only do simple problem solving, then I'm going to make the move into more sophisticated problem solving when I move to the next stage of development. There are some criticisms of Piaget. One is the age of transition does not seem to be consistent across cultures. So some cultures, children develop differently, faster, slower than the norm that Piaget represented in the stages. There's a question about whether or not that development can be accelerated, and that's the idea that we have of children who sort of jump very quickly through the different stages. So we have the children who are geniuses and are going to college by the age of 11. The wonder is how's that possible if everybody's supposed to go through the same stages of development. Children of the same ages can also be at very different levels. So you can have some children that are in a pre-operational stage and others that are in a concrete operational stage, even though they're the same age. And the other question is, do you really restructure your schemes, or do you simply know more? See, the information processing people would say you just simply learned more things. You would know more because you would have more stuff in your memory. It's not really a scheme-based thing. It's more just different packets of information in your mind. Piaget has been developed and adapted over the years into instruction, and there are a couple different ways that that's happened. One is that learning environments that support activity have come into play. So we actually encourage students to play. We encourage them to experiment on their own. And this would be the kinds of schools and teachers that believe that you want to promote self-discovery and that you don't want the teacher to be the only one providing their conceptions. So in other words, it's very important for the student to construct their own knowledge. Another piece of Piaget is that it promotes peer interactions, his theories. Peers have similar cognitive structures and schemes, and therefore they provide better feedback. It's very difficult for me in a much higher stage of development to go back to an earlier stage and understand what's going on in a student's mind, but a student of the same age who's going through the same process may be able to help that student better. We also want to make children aware of conflicts and inconsistencies in their thinking, so we're actually promoting disequilibrium, at the time when you know the student's ready for it. So when you kind of sense that a student, or because you've done testing, sense that a student is ready to make the jump from one stage to another, that's a good time to start providing the student with things that challenge their understandings or challenge their schemes. There's the idea of the importance of rules. Opportunities should be created for them to practice rules as they're learning those problem-solving processes. And you want to reduce the memory load and make it more automatic so that the student is able to apply the rule more quickly, and therefore they are more likely to use it. And there's also the idea of promoting conceptual change, presenting anomalies or analogies that challenge preconceived notions. And the idea is you want to try to then bring the child's conception in line with logical explanations and scientific findings. In other words, Piaget didn't believe in a sort of a social constructivist or an individual construction of knowledge, and that there were in fact cultural understandings of what would be true and not true. So it's not a relativist type of understanding of knowledge. It's more the idea that the student comes to this knowledge on their own that's important. So to conclude, Piaget's influence is seen in the national curriculum change that happened in American public schools in the 60s, when children were given more individualized attention. We started grouping students by age into grade levels, and then the curriculum for each grade was aligned to what a child in that developmental stage is capable of learning. So we actually see Piaget's influence all the time in our curriculum, and in the way that we do grade levels and groupings and things like that. That's all basically Piaget. That's the idea that students are in different developmental stages depending upon their age. Most of us in this course are a product of that, actually. Most of us probably went to school in a time when Piaget's influence was pretty strong. The question I would have for you then is, do you think these ideas still hold true? Do you think that in this day and age of computer-based and digitally enhanced learning, do we actually have a situation in which we should group students by age, or would we be better off going in a different direction? So I'll leave that to you guys to talk about and to think about for yourselves, and I hope this helped you understand Piaget a little bit better.